Keep going. Aha, Dr. Welsh, it's all yours. Never been so happy to pass the baton.
There you go. I know it's I think probably a good example of some of the things that I'm sure we have going on right now, even with our teachers in our classrooms, right? We're all trying to adjust to this new world of doing everything online. And as I often say about technology, it's great when it works, and when it doesn't, it's just a burden. So no, appreciate the time here this afternoon, and the time shift. I know when it's all those little things that you don't think about when you're shifting to an online setting. We were getting ready to plan for this, and I think Jessica had reached out and said, hey, so most of the families are going to be trying to work with their kids at that same time. I'm like, oh gosh, that's so true. So I appreciate everybody adjusting for the time change there. That way we could make it work for everybody. So I'll just dive in here. First, I want to give a shout out. I believe I think I saw everybody on the cabinet team on there, and maybe they can unmute and say hi. For those who may be new, or for those who maybe haven't seen faces in a while, this is the leadership team that helps me out every day and does all of the real work. Just amazing job. And with all the things that are going on right now with COVID and reacting, we have all, and this team has really just stepped up and done so much to make those adjustments that we need to make. So I think I saw Ms. Felton on here. If you want to say a quick hello to everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy start to school. I know we're very excited in the Felton household, so I wish everyone luck and for everyone to have a great new year. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Next up, we have Dr. Corson, who's Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. Thanks again for all the support UPC has given our staff and our teams. We really appreciate the work and the partnership that we've had with UPC.
Thank you, Dr. Corson. Next up, we have Dr. Bales over in HR. I don't know if I saw him in there. We might circle back here because I know he might have been thinking the 4:30 there. Next up, we got Dr. Jarris, the voice behind the Good News Network there, our Leadership Elementary Assistant Superintendent. Dr. Jarris.
Am I supposed to do a whole good news segment right now?
Yeah, didn't I tell you?
Oh, shit. Well, hey, again, everyone else said we appreciate your support, not just as UPC, but as parents. We've had I feel like a very positive start to the year with the online piece. And yet we know it's not perfect, and we know that it's still a lot of work for you and your children. Our teachers are working hard as well, but we appreciate all of you and your patience and support in making this be successful. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jarris. And last up, but certainly not least, for Leadership Secondary, we have Andre Long.
Good evening, everyone. I'm excited for my second year in PVUSD. One thing for sure is nothing's been the same. Change is good, and I'm excited for our continued partnership.
All right. So it says somebody annotating. I don't want annotating. There we go. All right.
Hi, so Dr. Welsh.
Oh, there he is. Oh, perfect. I figured maybe we missed you because we're a little bit early. Please, Dr. Bales, thank you.
No, that's all right. Happy to be here. Thank you. I snuck in here just a few minutes, and I'm looking forward to supporting PV schools, and thankful for UPC, their leadership and support. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bales. All right, so let me dive in on some hot topics here for opening of school. Obviously, this is a very unique school year compared to previous years. Want to talk just a little bit about some of the, I think, exciting things that are going on. And while we are in this virtual mode for the start of school, we were able to do a lot of really fun and inventive ways to kick things off. As I'm sure probably many of you experienced, a lot of the events that we did were virtual. So we had a lot of virtual meet the teacher and curriculum nights. I think as a parent and having experienced 3 of them myself, it was a good opportunity to give all the tech a dry run, make sure things were working. I think that's what teachers were thinking too. And it was kind of nice being able to do that without having to necessarily go up and down the halls and things in some of those cases. and be able to do so at the comfort of your own home with a beverage in hand, perhaps. Some of the other things we had going on, and these are just some examples. Over at Sandpiper, I know they did a virtual town hall meeting for parents where parents could submit some questions in advance, and they would answer those during the town hall. It's a good format. We've also had a lot of other kind of unique ways for teachers to reach out, where teachers have recorded welcome back videos and made phone calls to families. Again, that's one of the hard things, I think, is that you don't get that opportunity to get to know the teachers in the same way that maybe you do spending time in the classroom. And so as much as possible, trying to find other ways to build those relationships. And we've had other types of events too, where, at Desert Shadows Elementary, they did a drive-through for some materials and resources. They're actually doing some continuing things. And we're seeing that a little bit more at a good handful of schools across the K-12 spectrum, where, as there's materials, perhaps reading materials. I know one school, they were talking about having students pick up clay for their ceramics class, because I'm sure probably like many of you, you're wondering, how do you do online ceramics? It is possible. So people are finding a way to make those things happen, even when we think that perhaps it's not going to be as easy to do. And then one last example there too, just another drive-through. I thought this was a nice one over at Mercury Mine, drive-through event for our kindergarten and first graders. Again, those relationships are so key. And so they, got to do a drive-through to meet the teachers, get to know who those folks were, so that when they popped online, they actually had an idea of who they would be spending their year with. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the different instructional models, and the image that you see over here, ironically enough, it's kind of meta. It was me visiting a classroom, saying hi to the class, and one of the students in the class who is in a different classroom in a different school sharing the picture. Just to make your mind get blown a little bit there. I mean, the teachers are really doing a great job of making it work. I'm sure, like all of us, you have been seeing a lot of things through Google Classroom. That is our primary learning management system. Everything is going through there. And then we're doing that real-time instruction primarily through Google Meet or WebEx. I think mostly everybody's been using Google Meet. I will share, I know there was some discussion even last year talking about Zoom. If you remember when Zoom came out early on when COVID hit, there were some security issues they were working through. They've actually patched many of those, if not all of those, over the summer. We're doing some piloting with some Zoom in some select areas, particularly with our fine arts. And so we'll give that a test run, kick the tires a little bit, and see how that goes. And then, continuing just to gather feedback from teachers. We work closely with PVEA, our teacher association, who pushed out a survey to their teachers. I believe it closes this Friday, just to get some feedback in terms of what's working, what's not. Not surprisingly, a lot of our teachers have been both excited, a little nervous. They feel generally positive about how things have been rolling out and feeling prepared, but probably less so than in a normal year. And then we are looking through that too to see what other things we can do to help support our teachers. And then I think one of the other things that's really important to mention is online security. I am sure if you watch the news like any of us, you see some of the things that are out there in terms of people bombing into meetings. We have introduced some additional protocols and some best practices, as well as there's some additional functionalities that are coming out through Google Meet in particular that I think will help lock things down. I don't want to get into too many. Well, I can get into details with you guys. You're not going to tell the kids. It's the kids we got to worry about information. One really simple one in particular. It's some of it's just common sense, not posting links publicly. With those links to Google Classrooms, you may or may not have noticed, but we're asking teachers to change the link in those headers every day. So it's a different link each day. That way they can't pass it along to their friend who can then log into the class. It's kind of akin to somebody running down the hall and popping in another classroom. And so that's helped to mitigate some of those issues. Interestingly, one of the things that we've looked at was trying to disable call-ins. Anybody who's calling in, the teacher still has to admit those people into the meeting. So hopefully they're being cautious in terms of looking at those phone numbers and making sure they know it's probably one of the students. But funny enough, we've actually had a number of students who perhaps have limited access who have been making some pretty strong use of that call-in. So while we initially thought, well, gosh, maybe we could turn that off, at this point we've decided we really can't, because there's some students that really need that in order to be able to access classes. There's some additional security features and enhancements that we're working on with Google. Google recently announced that they have some additional features that are going to be rolling out pretty soon that are going to make Google Classroom more robust, which includes some security pieces. And working with Jeff in technology, we're looking at some additional ways where we can perhaps do auto rostering into those Google Meets, so that way only those students who are rostered into there can actually get into there. So got a lot going on there, and we're all adjusting to that, but I think we're doing everything we can possibly do to mitigate some of that. And there's going to be, just like in a regular classroom, there's going to be those situations where kids are misbehaving in a classroom. If it's a student in that class, we will deal with it in the same way that we would typically deal with it in a face-to-face setting, just applied to an online. There we go. All right, so PV Online, this was the big lift. And for those of you who may have students enrolled with PV Online, thank you for your patience. Just look at the numbers for a second, and that tells the big story. Last year and in a typical year, primarily PV Online is really a high school program. You can see our numbers at elementary and middle school very low. And this year it is a complete 180. The amount of students that they have, look at that, 11 elementary students, now 545. That is just astronomical lift. And so, we assigned additional staff, of course, to meet that demand. It was really nice to be able to match up some of the staff needs with what the student needs were. So we had some teachers that perhaps weren't feeling as comfortable with a return to a classroom, but they said they were willing to teach online. And so we were able to do a lot of that pairing as we hoped we might be able to do. Middle school in particular was a little bit of a challenge because of the nature of middle school and the licensure that teachers have to have. We did supplemental contracts, so it's like an additional period on their day. The good news was that made it really easy to scale up. The bad news was there were some delays in trying to get that staffing, because that was a lot more work. So again, big thank you to Dr. Bales and HR for all the work in getting that going. And some of the manual processes that had to happen there with a lot of that content at elementary and middle school being through Edgenuity. There wasn't an integration in there. And so we had a lot of kids moving back and forth, who might have gotten a couple days into PV Online or a couple days into PVConnect and said, gosh, I really think I'm looking for the other thing. And so, we decided to help and take those, but we didn't, it did make it a little bit more challenging to figure out some of the staffing, which made it a little tighter in terms of trying to get things going there. I also want to share, and this is hot off the presses, this is straight from yesterday, and there's a little bit of context to this that I think will help. This is our enrollment numbers. You can see last year compared to this year. I think I shared some similar data last year for opening bell, and what the percent changes. You can see PV Online, that yes, that number is correct. That is a 1,200% increase in enrollment compared to this time last year. That is a frightening thought. And you see some of the shifts in our numbers. Some of that, I'll give a little bit of context here. We anticipated that there was going to be some impact because of the pandemic, particularly in kindergarten. You see, I actually added kindergarten here at the bottom of the screen. What we're seeing and what we had heard parents talking about was there's a lot of parents who are, as the term goes, redshirting those kindergartners and holding them back to maybe start a little later in the year or maybe even next year. And so there's a big drop in terms of our kindergarten classes. That drop in kindergarten represents 42% of that total shift in enrollment. So a lot of the shift in our numbers can be directly attributed just to that. Another big piece of it is really that move from the traditional, or at least our PVConnect setting, to PV Online. So while you see those numbers at elementary, middle, and high school going down, that's also because, as I showed on the previous slide there, some of those kids went over to PV Online. And so about half of that shift at the middle and high school can be directly attributed to kids going to PV Online, and it's about a third of that shift at elementary. So you put those together, we're actually in much better shape overall than it may seem, but certainly some challenges there. I think one positive, though, I'll share, and you see it off to the right here on the slide. Attendance has been fantastic, and our schools have been on it in terms of tracking down kids, making sure kids are getting connected and logging in. We've had 95% attendance through the first 10 days. I can tell you just through some of the situations that I've heard about, schools are literally tracking those kids down. If it comes down to knocking on doors, they are knocking on doors. And so there are very few students out there at this point that we're still trying to track down and find. Everybody who is enrolled is in class and has been attending class. And to me, that is a huge sigh of relief. I know my 3 a.m. thought the day before school started is, what if you start school online and nobody shows up? That would be quite an interesting and disturbing thought. Couple other things we have going on. You might have heard about the requirement in the Executive Order 2020-51 that we have to provide on-site support. We know it's based on our data not safe for students to be returning to school at this time, but we are required to provide on-site support for those students who may need a safe place to learn. We have that going at 5 sites right now: Desert Shadows, Explorer, Greenway, North Canyon, and Shadow Mountain. We shared all of the expectations with those parents in terms of the protocols, wearing masks, safety and hygiene, the daily schedule, what to bring. Interestingly, of those families that signed up over these first couple of days, a lot of them have decided after seeing probably all of that they're like, you know what, I think I'm okay with having my student just continue to work from home. They might have figured out how to do that. We did have a little bit of a backlog of folks who had applied after the deadline, and so now we're able to work some of those folks in. So we anticipate being able to service everybody who has expressed a need. And they do have food service there. They have the nurses on site, and a huge shout out to our community ed team for running that, as well as to a lot of our transportation employees who've been on site helping out. And I mean, I've really been impressed. I've seen some of our bus drivers, our bus aides, getting in there and just helping students out, answering questions, making sure they're set up and that they're able to get their tech working. And so that's been great. It's been a success, and we've not had numbers that have given us any concern in terms of being able to maintain the safety of our students, which is so critical right now. We've also had some work that we've been doing this week on some of our special education, particularly for some of our students who have the highest need. There is a requirement that we provide targeted services for those students who have needs that can't be met in a virtual environment. As much as possible, and probably more than I think most people would surmise, we're able to meet a lot of those needs virtually, but there are just some things you just can't do in an online setting. And so we've been working with our groups, with PVP, with PVA, with PVSEA in particular, to really drill down and figure out what those services look like. We had originally planned on getting things rolled out last week. We tapped the brakes a little bit following our study. We got some, I think, really good advice from legal in terms of what we can and can't do and how we could be a little bit more flexible. And so that's going to be rolling out next week, and they are in the middle of finalizing that right now. I also want to highlight, this is, I think, a really important one. If you don't have this site bookmarked, I would highly recommend that you do. This is I'm really excited about this. I'll admit, I was maybe a bit dubious at first that this would come through and be as robust as it is, but I got to tell you, the Maricopa County Health Department really came through on this. So they put together a website that allows us to look not only at the county level, at a city level, at a district level. Yes, thank you. There it is. At the district level and at the zip code level, and provide the metrics aligned to those state recommendations for whether it's safe to reopen or not. This is our data as of today. They're going to update this every week. From what it says on the webpage, they say they're going to update it every Thursday at 4. So by this time tomorrow, there'll probably be some new numbers in there for most recent data. And you can see the 2 key indicators that we're looking at are those cases per 100,000 and that percent positivity. And you may remember from just a few weeks ago, we talked about the criteria for reopening and that red light, yellow light, green light. For us to hit that green light, our percent positivity needs to be below 5%. And for cases per 100,000 people, that needs to be below 10. That's probably going to be the tougher one right now as you look at those numbers. The good news is we've been seeing some dramatic decreases, and you can see even just looking at the data from last week, I mean, that is a significant drop just even in a week. So if we continue to see that progress being made, we're going to have the opportunity to get back to in-person learning, hopefully sooner rather than later. And really, it just is incumbent on all of us to mask up, to maintain our distancing, to be safe out there, because that's ultimately how we get back into learning. And it works the opposite direction too there. So if we, once we get back to in-person learning, if we see that those criteria are starting to creep up into the yellow, that's just like when you're driving a car, right? If you see a yellow light, okay, I know for some people it does mean go faster, but for most people, it means you better watch out, caution, you know, and if you see that red light means stop. Well, it's the same for us. You know, if we get to that yellow light, that's where we're going to say, hey guys, you know, we might have to go back to online if this doesn't start looking any better. And then if we hit that red light back in the criteria, then we'll have to go back to an online learning. Hopefully we don't get there, we'll see, but we'll continue to monitor that. And I encourage you to do the same. And as people may be asking questions about, you know, hey, what are the criteria we're looking at? This is exactly it. So yeah, and I'll answer that question too in terms of some of the questions on the data. I'll hold to the end if I could on that. So just a couple little things talking about in-person learning. I just want to confirm and affirm with everybody that we are looking at the best ways to implement both our traditional model and that PVConnect model. And we'll be working with our schools, our principals to work with families to be able to gauge interest in terms of families who are comfortable with a return to in-person learning at that point in time. And maybe those who are not comfortable and want to be able to continue with that PVConnect model. And then we'll work at a school level to make adjustments to schedules if necessary to accommodate that demand for PVConnect. I also want to share that you know, one of the good things about the delay in opening online is it's given us a little bit more time to really make sure that all of the things that we had in motion and planned for this fall, that we've been able to get those complete. So we've got, I think you might have heard me talk, it might have been back in March. I can't remember now, you know, it's COVID time. It's like one month is about 6 years in COVID time or something like that. You know, we're working on adding additional sinks at all of our schools. That work, I believe, is completed everywhere. We're adding additional sanitizer stations at our schools. We have additional cleaning practices already in place at some of those schools that are hosting some of those on-site services. And then, you know, we're working in those cases, particularly with some of our higher need populations to have that PPE. So all of those things are going on. And I do want to remind everybody while I've got you here too, you know, if all of the things that are in our return to schools plan, our PV prepared plan, which is still obviously on the website, those are still going to be in place when we go back to in-person learning. So, you know, wearing masks, having social distancing, enhanced sanitizing, all of those things are going to continue. One of those things that we included in the plan was in terms of visitors, that we're really only having visitors for those situations where it's really in the health and safety of our students. So I know as much as we all want to be able to, you know, get back to normal, whatever normal is these days, you know, there is going to be some limitations on being able to do those things. So I think it's important to just be aware of that. And you know, we're communicating that same thing through schools so that, you know, while we all want to be able to do, you know, like the birthday parties and, you know, all those kind of fun things, you know, we may not be able to do that right when we get back because we're still trying to make sure everybody's safe. You know, we want to get everybody in school, get everybody going, make sure those cases are staying low. You know, not do kind of like what happened back in May where, you know, it was Memorial Day and everybody said, oh, okay, it's good to go. You can go out and do things you want to do now, and then it just took off. So we're hoping not to have a repeat of that, you know, within our schools and obviously within our state. There we go. All right, last couple of things I want to hit on, then I'll hit questions. So despite the pandemic, I do actually have some goals for this year. And some of these are directly tied to the pandemic. So really 4 big areas, and I'm going to not read through all the text of this. I'll kind of breeze through it. First is really just talking about the pandemic. So working on our plans in terms of reopening, make sure we're communicating what all that is so that we have a safe return to in-person instruction. We continue to focus on social emotional learning. I hope many of you, like I know I did as a parent, got those emails and some of the reach out from our new SEL specialists that are in place at many of our schools right now to help support our students gosh, a critical time now more than ever to be able to do that. And even when we get back in person, of course. One of the other things that we continue to have as a challenge, and it will continue to be, I think, something we're going to have to deal with, is those additional costs. For those who may be so inclined, that is something we're going to be talking about at the study session tomorrow. And the short answer is it's very messy, and it's very hard to figure out what's going on with the finances right now, with all of the additional costs that are going on and some of the just very unique challenges in terms of the school finance and how it's going to work. And then, all of the different learning options, curriculum resources, PD, all those things that we know we need to have to be able to continue with online learning. The second one, we started it last year. We were getting close to the finish line, and then we had to put a pause on it, and that's the district's strategic plan. So we are going to pick that back up. I am hopeful that perhaps we can do that again in a face-to-face setting some point in the near future. If it looks like that doesn't look probable, we will find ways to do it in other formats. But we are going to commit to getting that work done here this year. One of the pieces I want to highlight too is, and I think this was, for those who were involved in that process, we had already seen some data and some feedback in terms of making sure we're addressing equity and cultural competency. And so we're going to make sure that that's in there as well. I think that's critical at this point. And another piece too, and just having a little bit of a year, or at least a regular 2/3 of a regular year and 1/3 of a COVID year under my belt, getting a chance to look at our org chart, and once we have that plan, how the two go together and making adjustments as we need to. Last two goals, again, continue to focus on instruction. While it seems almost like a secondary thing at this point, because safety has got to be number one, and I think rightfully so, we continue to focus on instruction. And so one of the things that we put in place this year were instructional coaches at our 8 schools. Those folks will be helping all of our teachers, and they were trained specifically too to help with some of the online learning structures. And so helping them to work with our teachers as we're navigating through online instruction and then transitioning back into traditional face-to-face instruction. Another couple of things that just I think really came out in terms of ahas from this past year, making sure we have our processes dialed in terms of what the course recommendation processes are for kids coming up from 6th grade to 7th and 8th grade, and then from 7th and 8th grade up into high school. And so making sure that we have consistency there, and that we're not putting unnecessary roadblocks in students' way, and allowing parents to push their kids where we think it's appropriate, so they can take the most rigorous coursework. Another one we identified too is just looking at our instructional minutes across all of our schools, K-8. We just noticed last year that there were some inconsistencies, so we'll be working with our schools on that one. And then, as was our focus last year and will continue to be, there are no new letter grade ratings come out because, of course, we didn't have any assessments last year. So the letter grades that everybody had last year were the same letter grades everybody's going to have this year. And so working with those schools that are identified to continue to support them as well. And then last goal is really, and I think this is a good piece of that, is that communication and collaboration with our staff and with our community. Again, some of these are just things that we've observed throughout the last year. One is just making sure we go back to the purposes of site councils, understanding what that is, and using that as a lever to increase parent engagement. One of the things I found this year is it just kind of varies a little bit site to site in terms of what you can find, how those site councils are being used. So we're going to work with our schools to get a little more consistency, get some more information out there, and hopefully use that as a way to help parents to be more engaged in some of the decision making that's happening in the schools. As always, and the work does keep going on, we have a lot of projects that have been getting worked on. Our construction on Elementary 33 is continuing to progress at this point. So we want to make sure everybody's aware of what those projects are with our bond and our DAA funds. As always, making sure that we're adhering to our community structures and really looking at that process to make sure that we've got the right people. There were a couple times, at least from some feedback I've gotten from the board, where perhaps it's been a while since we've looked at who's on the committees. It's been like the same committee for 5 years, so we'll look at those ones and see if maybe it's time to get some fresh faces in there. But making sure that we are following that process. It really is about the process and that collaboration. And then finally, and I think this is always relevant and probably just as much so as we roll into fall, into November elections, just continuing to advocate for our district, and probably no more critical time than right now with all of the uncertainty going on with the pandemic. So last thing I'll hit, and then I'll hit questions until Jessica gives me the hook. So I want to give a couple highlights here. If you're not familiar with these, you should get familiar with these. So you see on the right-hand side the links to Infinite Campus. If you don't have the app on your mobile device, I would strongly encourage you to do so. That way, of course, you can get updates on your kids' grades all the time, see how things are going on. Obviously, we have our links on social media. We have our Twitter, we have our Facebook. Just like UPC, we've actually started streaming our board meetings on YouTube. And so you can follow those on YouTube moving forward at this point. And on the left, you will see a sneak peek of our app that will be coming out in probably the next few weeks or so. We were kind of hoping we could launch it right when we get back to in-person learning. We'll see what the timing is working on that, but it is coming. So we do have a mobile app. You can see some of the features there where you can look up information about bus stops. You can get connected to Infinite Campus that way as well. You can get on our district website and then find out about specific events and news that are happening at whichever schools that you may select. So that is coming. We'll get more information out to families as soon as that's finalized. And so with that, Jess, if you want to be the quiz master here.
Yeah.
Okay,
you've got some questions in there, and so I know it's hard to formulate responses and also go through all this. So so thank you to everyone who did put questions in the chat box. Really appreciate it. There's some really great, I think, clarifying questions in there that will be helpful for everyone. So so Dr. Walsh, a question that came through with regards to the data that the district is looking at, are you going to be looking at sort of at a micro level to make some of these determinations for the district? Can you speak to that a little bit? Will you be looking at zip codes? There's a couple questions about that in our chat box.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. That's a great question. Yeah, primarily we'll be looking at the district data. Again, what's one of the great things about that website is, they actually have it for our district specifically. We'll look at our zip codes both within our district as well as a little bit kind of around our district. I think one of the things we want to be mindful of is that some of our students as well as our staff, live just outside of our boundaries. Interestingly enough, I actually happened to pull data on where our staff live, and I would say probably about 75% of them actually do live within our district boundaries, which is great. That says a lot in and of itself. But we'll be looking at the district primarily, and then just some of our neighboring areas just to see if maybe there's some hot spots there that we need to be mindful of.
Thank you. That's helpful. I'm gonna get to most of the questions in here, I think, because I think we do have time to get to them. But I'm gonna go kind of hop around a bit just because, based upon the topics that we're on. So another question that has come in based upon just sort of the yellow light, red light visual that we have. So if yellow happens after in-person learning, does it switch back to online immediately, or will there be a 2-week determination for that as well?
Yeah, probably part of that is we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Hopefully we don't have to cross that bridge. I'll keep my fingers crossed on that one. I think the thinking is that, if we've gotten back to green and we're back in in-person learning, if we get back into that yellow, we might say okay, if this trend continues, then, we might have to go back online at X date. I think, unfortunately, unlike a lot that goes on right now with this pandemic, you're trying to figure out some of these things on the fly. Again, I'm hopeful that perhaps when we get back to green, we can stay there. It certainly wouldn't be an overnight kind of thing, because I imagine, as families, you've got to then figure out what you're doing in terms of, watching kids and making adjustments to schedules. And, as teachers now have to switch all of these in-person lesson plans now back over to things that are in Google Classroom. So, we'll try to obviously make sure we've got some transition time. I know in terms of going from current virtual learning to online learning, we've said and committed to having at least a 2-week time frame on that. I would envision probably something similar along those lines. But, as we get to yellow, that might be hey, start getting those lesson plans lined up, start getting that babysitter lined up if you need somebody, because that could be where we're going. Because I think everybody does need some kind of heads up. It can't be something you just switch on.
Yeah, so this isn't a specific question that's in the chat box, but I am going to ask it only because I've seen it quite a bit on social media and parents asking. And so could you just speak a little bit to, when you and the board discussed that 2-week, sort of transition period, could you just speak to some of the rationale behind that, like as far as not only classroom setups, but sort of what that looks like for staff during that time too?
Yeah. One of the big things, in terms of having some of that transition time built in, and again, we'll try to, as we see those metrics moving to green, I don't want people to think that we're just going to be sitting here flat-footed and wait for it to be sitting here green for 2 weeks and then say, oh, it's going to be another 2 weeks. I think there was some perhaps misunderstanding in hearing that it's, like this month time frame. I don't know that it's necessarily a month. I don't think that's the intent, but, in terms of having that transition time in particular, teachers do need some time to make sure that both their lesson plans, can be switched over to, a face-to-face setting, because it is, as you guys all know, a very different learning environment going from online to face-to-face, as well as just, having classrooms set up and ready to go with all of the materials that you might need and ready to go for that. I think the other really big piece is just the logistics of, getting all the transportation routes back up and running, getting food service back up, getting those folks who are now providing on-site support now back into their regular roles so they can do those things, as well as, for those families who are choosing to continue with PVConnect, we want to make sure that we have enough time for schools to collect that information from families so that they can figure out how best to work with those schedules to have the least amount of disruption for students and staff and for families, but to be able to, make the adjustments and shifts as necessary so that, they can accommodate those schedules. So it's a lot of logistics that has to, honestly, 2 weeks is really a short amount of time to be able to make that happen. And again, we might look at that, if there's a natural break point somewhere. And again, I'm not trying to speak this into being one way or the other. So, don't walk away and go, oh, Dr. Welsh said we're not coming back till the end of the quarter. But for an example, if it was like close to the end of the quarter, we might say, okay, that's a nice natural cutoff point. It makes a lot of sense to make a switch right at that point. If it worked out that way, wonderful, great. If not, again, not a big deal, but, makes a lot of sense to try to, use those natural breaks to make things happen.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful because I think that, just kind of having that big picture perspective and knowing how many different things have to be considered is just helpful into understanding the why behind some of that.
Yes.
So there's another question just about the data. So, and I think it's a really good question. So thank you to the person who put this question in there. So the date when you're looking at the data, right, on the websites, there's that lag period, right? So it's basically 8/8. And today is, I don't know, like you said, Dr. Welsh, what is today? I think it's the 19th, but I'm not quite sure. So like, what are you all doing to sort of account for that lag when, making these really big decisions about reopening?
Yeah, and in fact, right before this, I was on a webinar with Maricopa County, and they acknowledged that. So there's effectively a 12-day lag between the data that's posted there and, when it actually gets there. And part of the reason for that is, of course, they've got to make sure that the data is clean and accurate as much as possible. So, the data that they're posting tomorrow will be for the week of, let me see if I can remember that right, the 9th through whatever the end of that week is, so there is always going to be that like kind of 12-day delay. And I think that's where, as we're looking at that, if we see that things are trending in a direction and we think that, we're going to be in the green by a certain date, that's where we can start setting those things in motion. So I keep talking about not being caught flat-footed. We're not going to just sit here and wait until everything's green forever. It's like, you can kind of see if there's a pattern going. It's not a guarantee, but I think we can begin to plan in that direction and say, okay, it looks like this is going to be the target date at this point if everything keeps going the way it's going. And so if that is, then what do we need to get doing right at that point in time?
Right. That's where I think even that 2-week maybe transition period is helpful too, right? Because it kind of then starts to kind of give you an even better picture as to the trajectory that we're on. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it could kind of bounce up or something, and if it does, then you go, okay, hold on, we thought we were there, but let's wait a second, and if not, then it's like, okay, we're still going, we're good.
Exactly. And so you spoke to a little bit about PVConnect and sort of the considerations that have to be made by the district and by staffing, when we're going back into this green light, going back into traditional. So there's a question about, will PVConnect look the same as it does now when we have in-person traditional schooling going on?
Yeah, great question. We actually have Dr. Corson is leading up a group. I believe they may be starting next week because we got a little busy working on special ed this week. And so that's actually one of the things that we're going to be focused on. I think it'll look similar, not necessarily identical, but pretty close. As you can imagine, one of the challenges being that, if primarily a teacher, let's say you have 25 kids in the classroom, and the teacher's working with 20 of those kids in person, and let's say there's 5 kids online, it's going to look a little different than right now where all of your students are online. And so we're trying to work with our teachers, with UPC, with our support staff, with our principals, to really think through what that's going to look like and what's going to be effective. We don't want those 5 students that are online through PVConnect to, kind of be lost in the shuffle, online. And, we also don't necessarily want, those 20, and I'm just making up numbers, but, those 20 kids that are sitting in front of the teacher, to be kind of out doing what they're doing while the teacher has to work over here with the 5 kids. So we're trying to figure out the best way to balance that, and I don't want to necessarily prescribe solutions. I'll trust the process there, but some of the things that we've talked about is, if you have, let's say you're at an elementary school and you have, 5 third grades at that school, if you had a couple of kids in each one of those classrooms, one of the things we may look at is, would it make sense for one teacher perhaps to be working with those kids, rather than have them spread out there? That way they're going to get a better attention than would otherwise. I think those are some of the things that we're going to be trying to wrangle with in terms of the best way to do that.
Thank you. There's a question about visitor protocol. So, and just looking for a little bit of clarification. So I'm just going to read the question as it was written. I was under the impression that visitors would be allowed for Art Masterpiece, Junior Achievement, reading volunteers as long as they were masked.
Yeah, so I hate to be the bearer of the serious news there, but so I'll go back to, I might have to find it, or I'll have to remember, but if you go find the plan, it's kind of funny. It was fresh in our minds, not too long ago, and it's kind of been there for a little bit. What we have committed to was saying that, we're not going to have volunteers on campus unless it really pertains to the health and safety of our students. And so, even some of the things like, with our VIPs, we've been having to do that virtually. And so I think, until we get to a point in time where we feel like it's appropriate to be able to be allowing more of those people on campus, that's not something we're going to be able to do. And I want to share, part of the rationale with that too is, you have to think about cohorting and contact tracing. And so, imagine the complexity that comes with having a number of folks that may be coming in and out of a classroom. And, let's say that there is a case of, COVID-19, or even a suspected case, that pops up in a classroom. Now we've got to figure out, well, who are the people that have been in that classroom? Who is that student or staff member engaged with? And now we've got to backwards track all of these additional people that have now come in contact with that class, and maybe multiple classes at that point. And so as much as possible, we're really trying to keep to that cohorting concept. So, if you have a teacher in that classroom and they are sticking together for the most part, and they're not necessarily interacting in any way in terms of what we mean by close contact, less than 10 minutes within 6 feet of other people, then we know if there was a case there, it's confined to that group. If we start having more and more people coming in and out of and mixing within groups, it makes that contact tracing so much harder, and it further increases the spread. I mean, those kind of individuals essentially, could become a super spreader if they pop into 5 different classrooms.
Yeah, fair enough. And I mean, I think it's important to note, this isn't forever, right? And so these are protocols that are in place for the time being. And as soon as, we can hopefully get this all under control as a greater community, the PV will look and be reasonable and change things. So there's your energy savings going on there.
Saving a buck every day.
This is a good one here. It's a parent who, would be interested in the on-site support that the district has going on at a couple of different sites right now. But it's not really workable for them because they can't pick them up at, I think they say it's a 1 o'clock time. Is there any talk or conversation about changing that or working with that, or are there any other options available within the district for parents that can't pick up at 1 o'clock?
Yeah, I mean, there are some other options. We do have some of our mascot camps going on right now. Those ones, and just be transparent, I mean, there is a fee associated with those programs. We are a little bit limited in terms of the staffing we have. We're running kind of tight already on staffing, hence why, we actually, as I shared, have some of our transportation drivers helping out with providing support for on-site support. So that is one option I know that's at least out there. There's a couple of spots I know with, Boys and Girls Club that we've worked with. We have a partnership with Oasis Church where they have a group of kids too. So there's a few things out there, but I understand that's definitely a limiting factor. We're doing the best we can to meet that need with the staffing that we have and making sure we're keeping everybody safe too.
Is there a place where, parents that are in that position, whether it's on the district website or does that information live somewhere where they could maybe find out if there's a wait list, for example, for one of the, partnerships that you mentioned?
I'll have to check. I don't know off the top of my head. So
okay, and then we can work on that maybe even together, and we can try to share that information.
Yeah, I'll make a note. We can follow up. Go ahead.
Dr. Welsh, this is Michelle Anderson to chime in. The reason why we didn't have it on the website is because we can't play favoritism to one business or entity over another. And if we missed one or one didn't meet our standards, it comes across as if we're promoting somebody who maybe wasn't as safe. So that's why we didn't have that on the website.
Yep.
Understood, which is why, yes, I would be happy to maybe share some of that information through UPC. Dr. Jarris, did you have something to add?
Yeah. Our sites that had the mascot camp, we had initially begun, again, due to full limitations in staffing and space, initially just sent that out through the current list of people who are assigned mascot camp or interested in mascot camp. So it was actually not posted anywhere because we already had a built-in clientele. So I believe it was the parent's name in there. Feel free to reach out to me and I will make sure that we get you that information.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay, so we have a question about, when will the district basically put forth an opinion or share policies, make a decision on the possible start of athletics?
So, it's kind of funny because we've been doing athletics. We're in stage, we've been in stage up and through this Monday. Monday, we began stage 2 workouts or conditioning. Sorry, let me make sure I'm using the correct terminology here. Conditioning. We've committed in terms of our non-contact sports to moving forward with golf, badminton, swim, dive, cross country. I remember I'm missing one there. Somebody's going to yell at me if I did. We're still trying to figure out a little bit on, volleyball is kind of an in between because it's not really a contact sport in the way that football is. But it's certainly not like, golf where, you could go a whole golf game and not get within 6 feet of anybody. If you shoot the ball like me, you could not get within 100 yards of anybody. And so, yeah, that was a joke, people. That's all right.
We're muted, so it's not fair.
I know.
We're all
I know.
laughing.
That's the hard part. I'm just having fun. Yeah. So in terms of football, I think that's going to be the bigger question. What we've said in the past is it's really tied to those criteria for in-person learning. So I think if we can get in the green and see that we are at that place, for in-person learning, then we're going to be able to continue and operate on that. We do have a couple of weeks until, football is supposed to start. I believe it's September 7th off the top of my head there. So, we're just continuing to monitor those numbers. And hopefully we see those come down to the point where we can continue to do that. That's part of why we felt it was important to make sure we continue with conditioning, because it keeps the kids in there and, puts them on the same par as everybody else. I had a conversation with many of the districts around us yesterday. They're all in the same place. right now in stage 2 conditioning. So, we're not any further ahead or behind where everybody else is. I think there's probably just been certainly a lot of speculation and certainly some attention drawn to it because of some, recent posts out there by some individuals that have drawn additional attention to the topic. But, and I think the key thing is, I know that our ADs, our coaches are doing everything they can to keep those kids safe. They are following those protocols to the T. And anytime that I have heard anything or, we've gotten any reports saying, that something may be not done appropriately, we're following up on that. So far, none of those have checked out to say that, people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so that's been very encouraging. And of course, we would never want it to happen. We're hoping we don't have any issues with cases. If we do, then we'll deal with that and we may have to shut some things down. But, I know that the coaches are being, very careful of that and following all the protocols to the letter.
Thank you. Thank you for the update. There's a question. Is there a plan in place if teachers decide not to return or walk out? And I don't want to speak out of turn, but if I might just kind of say that I think that part, and I certainly want you to add to this, Dr. Walsh, but from my perspective, this really has been a collaborative process and part of, I think, what will ensure, I mean, as best as possible, that is not a situation we wind up in, is the constant communication that you are having with PVEA and other teachers and staff, right? And to really make sure that they're part of the process and that everybody's comfort level is taken into consideration, and those conversations are constantly happening. So I can't imagine a world where we would be totally caught off guard like that. But obviously, this question is for you, but I just wanted to share as a parent, that's been my perspective, a parent who's been involved in these conversations, is that the district really is listening to staff.
Yeah, no, I would echo that same thing. I mean, that's part of the importance of the process. We've been engaging with all of our stakeholders and with PVA specifically throughout all this. I mean, as we developed the reopening plan, I mean, they were critical voices at that table, and we made sure that everything that we have in there that we stand behind, and when you put together a plan with the people that are going to be involved and you stand behind it, I think that goes a long way to making sure that, we're going to be there. And I hope and I believe, I mean, I know I talk with, Susie regularly, Susie Seep, the, current PVEA president. If there were any issues popping up, she'd let me know. But again, I think that goes back to, we follow that process, we trust the process, and that's what allows us to be able to move forward with that. You see in the news and in some of those other places where that's not occurring, that's the ramifications of not involving people in that process. And I mean, it's certainly unfortunate that, in at least one of those places that I can think of that will go unnamed, but also has the same first letter as my name, that that board, against the advice of the superintendent and against what everybody, the teachers were saying, they chose to open, and they ran into some problems as a result of that. And so, I mean, that's why we work together. Right.
Yeah. So I know you spoke a lot about data and how you're evaluating data, but looks like there's still a few questions in here about, will individual schools within the district be open if we're looking at a zip code or a neighborhood level? And so just want you to be able to respond to that specifically.
Yeah, most likely not. I mean, unless for some reason there was just some outlier out there. It's hard to get down to a school level. The most granular data that we have is, of course, zip code. So unless we saw something within a specific zip code, and the last that I checked, the zip codes within our district are all pretty cohesive. I don't think we would. It would certainly be very challenging to do. If we get to a point where a specific school has, an outbreak of cases, that could be something that happens. That's, a contingency we obviously have to, be ready for. Again, I hope we don't get to that point. That's why we're waiting till it's safe so that we don't have those problems. But generally, no, not likely.
Right. I mean, when we think about open enrollment and all of that too, it really just becomes kind of, I think, hard to look at it at such a, that one zip code sort of level.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, let's see. Are schools using parent volunteers to help with online learning, or are you considering using volunteers to help teachers virtually? Because we do have parents that would love to help. I know you mentioned VIP. Obviously, that's a bit of a different, program, but specifically, is there, a need, and could parents help in that way?
Yeah, I'm getting my pen out here. That's a really good question. I know other than VIP, I don't know that that's been something we've been talking about. We can see if that's something we might be able to spin up. Probably the other hope and challenge on my part is hopefully we get back to in person. So by the time you get it spun up, it may not be an issue. But yeah, let me jot that down. I think that's a good question, and maybe we can work with our schools for a way to be able to make that opportunity. I mean, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for the generous person who is interested in doing that. If football is scheduled, will band be able to participate at the games?
That's the band question. Well, so I go back to the same thing. So a couple of things about games. I go back to the same thing I said, that if it's safe for students to be able to return to a classroom, and we're saying it's safe for kids to be able to play football, I would imagine it's going to be safe for marching band at that point. I think the better question regarding games, and again, I can tell you this is the same conversation that is happening in other districts in our area. It's not looking very likely at this point that we're going to have fans at those games in person. Restrictions right now on large group gatherings continues to be under 50. And so, we may still be able to do, have marching band perform at halftime. It may be, again, all via video. For the time being, but yeah, that is something I know we're planning on talking about further. It hasn't been something that's come up too much before, but I know we've got to start putting some things in place for that. So I think that is definitely a possibility.
And thank you to Mr. Andre Long and Melissa. They've added some information in there too to kind of help bring some clarity to that. So appreciate that. So there's a question about, so when we're talking about an outbreak and we're thinking about going back to school, and I know that the district is, I know you're all leadership in the governing board, you're speaking to public health experts and pediatricians. And so appreciate that you're seeking out, their expertise and making these plans. And so they may not be finalized, right? We've learned so much, even in just the short amount of time, right? As more studies come out and information comes out about how this virus works. But so the question really is looking to see if you've nailed down sort of a plan with what it will look like if there is a quote outbreak, what would actually be cause for an outbreak, right? Is it 1 student? Is it 2 students? And what sort of the protocols would be there? And if those plans are still in process, that makes sense too. But just wondering if you could speak to any changes there or anything that's sort of been nailed down at this point.
Yeah, so a couple things on that. Sorry that my lights keep going out here. It's like you just keep waving. Yeah, so in terms of, so part of it is following the guidance that we have from the state and from the county in terms of what that what would be considered an outbreak, or what those steps are. If I'm remembering my information correctly, I believe it was the county who has indicated that if you have 2 non-connected cases, they start to consider that a potential outbreak at a site. In regards to the county, or excuse me, the state authorizing the closing of a school, they have indicated that is only possible if the rate of cases is twice that of the county itself. You might have seen somewhat recently, I think it was Tolleson, that applied and was successful in their application to not provide on-site support because they are meeting those criteria. It's twice the rate within that area for their school as it is of the county. So if it did get to that point, that becomes an automatic. I'm a little concerned that from a pragmatic perspective, that is a very large percentage one would have to reach. So if you're under 5, you're basically saying, let's say you're at 5, you'd have to have a 10% going on at a school site before the state would automatically say, yes, intervene, close it down. I think it's another one of those, we may have to cross that bridge when we get there in terms of, at what point does it just not make sense? And that's where we might have to say at a school level, if we start to see an increase in cases at a specific school where, we might have a school that needs to go, back online so that we can, essentially quarantine the school and do that. Again, I hate having to even talk about those kind of things. It could happen, but in terms of a specific metric, while we could certainly follow the state's numbers on that, I think we would probably have to intervene before that, because to me, twice the level of what's going on in the county that's a pretty significant number.
There's something going on there. Yeah. Okay. So want to just be really mindful of your time. We've had you in the hot seat for a really long time. So there's just a couple, and we're going to kind of end it at the questions that are in there now. So there's 3 final questions. So if anyone has additional stuff, feel free to email me and we'll try to get you answers, but really appreciate the cabinet's time and you, Dr. Welsh, spending all this time answering these questions, because we know how important it is to families. So thank you. Is the hybrid model still being considered as an option once benchmarks are met? And if so, will it take place at the student's home, or will it really just kind of depend on where the interest is? And that's maybe where students would be charged with going.
Yeah, I guess it probably depends on one's thought, because that term hybrid kind of gets thrown around a lot without much of a definition. I think when I'm thinking of hybrid right now, it's that mix of the PV traditional model and the PVConnect model as a hybrid. And, and it could be that for some students, if they're, not comfortable, that they do a little bit of switching in between there. But I think primarily that's what we're looking at. I know originally when we were making plans over the summer, and that was before we ultimately had to make the decision to start online, we were talking about having, the PV Flex model in there. It's certainly something we could look at, but logistically, it would have to be something where we'd have to go system wide if we were going to do a flex model, which I don't know at this point if that makes a lot of sense. I think we probably go with that PV traditional, that PVConnect, which is a hybrid, because again, people can pick and choose. It's a mix of the two.
Thank you. Once we get back in person, how often will the district be reevaluating protocol for volunteers and enrichment programs? And will this be looked at as if the data continues to improve rapidly?
Yeah, I mean, based on the fact that we, at this point are getting data on a weekly basis, I think just keep looking at those on a weekly basis. I'm sure too that, we will be listening to and certainly be guided by some of the recommendations from health experts out there, from the Department of Health Services, from Maricopa County Department of Public Health, with our COVID-19 response team, which, and our medical professionals that we include on there. So I think all of those will help inform that. There's, as is often the case right now with this pandemic, there's not really a straightforward answer sometimes to some of those things. I wish we could say, hey, you hit this magic metric and we can say, okay, all of it goes away. But as we all know, it's not that simple.
Right. Okay. Final question. So once we've just determined as a district what our in-person PV traditional date is, what will the process look like to figure out which families will stay on PVConnect versus the traditional in-person?
Yeah, so we'll be working with schools to have a process where they can gather feedback from families, kind of like similar to what we did this past, what was it, June? Again, all this feels like, COVID time. That was like 2 years ago. To gather feedback from families in terms of, if they wanted to do a PVConnect or PV online. So something similar to that, but less centralized, because we really want it to be driven at the school level, because as we've talked to our school leaders, they really feel like they can provide that flexibility best at that school level.
Makes sense. Thank you. And thank you to all of our attendees. I just want to say what an awesome group of participants. There's 127 people on right now, and that number has kind of been up and down a bit through the meeting, but really, really appreciate just everyone's participation. Great questions, great time that you've taken today to really make sure that parents' questions are answered. And so really appreciate that. Apologize again for the technical difficulties. I feel more for our teachers now in this moment than I ever have. That's a struggle, but we keep going. Our next meeting is September 16th. Please join us then. Our program will be What is Social Emotional Learning, or SEL, as you might have heard it, and why is it critical for student success? And so if you have any questions in the meantime, of course, feel free to email us. You can email me, president@pvupc.org. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your week.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, UPC.
Thank you, Dr. Welsh. Thanks, Cabinet.